So we're going to start creating. The reason that Apple did timestamps is because they didn't want to mess with any UI in their templates. We are going to do movie quotes, which is simple. It's just 2 strings, but still it takes a lot of code just to do something that simple. So we're going to make a little plus button up here, and then when you click it, it's going to show a little dialog box, which Apple calls alert views, and then it's going to have 2 text in it, and we're going to create quotes just like that. We're also going to learn a little bit in this is a lot of the times you'll find code online that actually is based on Objective-C instead of Swift, and just kind of being able to port it if that's what you find. And that's something I want you to be able to do in this class. So we're just kind of practice that concept a little bit. So the first thing we need is we need a button up here, right? So right now there's nowhere for me to click. So I need a button that I can click on just to make a little plus show up. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to add it programmatically instead of actually adding it over in the storyboard. I'm pretty sure you could add it in the storyboard, but to be honest, it's pretty easy to add in code. So we'll just go ahead and add it in code. So transition back over to your project, and it should be right here, which is great. And you can see that this is kind of why we left some of this code before, because it showed us some of the things we needed to do. So we need to set the navigation items right bar button item. Note that self dot is not actually required here. You can leave it, there's no harm. Apple clearly leaves it in a lot of places, so there's obviously no harm in leaving it. But just to kind of acknowledge that I don't have to have it, I'll delete it. And so what I want to do here is I want to make a UI bar button item, and I want to do a bar button item of a certain system style, so you can make custom ones, but I'm going to use a system style one. And then to kind of complete this, what I like to do is I just like to hit enter here, and that puts the text, and then I say dot, and then it just tells me all my options, right? I actually hit right arrow in there as well. And so you can see that I've got action or add, so add's what I want. Camera, edit, done, there's all kinds of things, right? So I want an add system button. Target, this is like what object you want to call the method on when it's clicked, and that's self. And then selector is just the name of some function. So I'm just going to call it add, I called it show add quote dialog. And dialog is not a word that Apple uses. They call them alert views, but I call them dialogues, right? So there I've got my function that I'm going to call when you click it. And then, as I like to do a lot of the times, I like to print things. You clicked on add. And then I just kind of get a warm, fuzzy feeling that everything's working once I do that. All right, so I've got myself a little button. Every time I click it, it just says, you clicked on add. So there's lots of ways to do things other than just like IB actions, IB outlets. This was a pretty lightweight way to add a button, using some built-in tools. I've said a couple times that this lecture kind of makes you feel dumber. Not because you get dumber, but because you start to get a better idea of what all there is out there in these frameworks that you need to learn, right? You're never going to learn it all, but man, there's a lot in CocoaTouch. So our goal is here to show a dialogue, to add a quote. To be honest, whenever I'm developing, I look online a lot, right? I spend a ton of time on Stack Overflow. And if I wanted to add a dialogue, I would do a Google search for dialogue iOS. I would probably pretty quickly find that dialogue is not the right word. So if I wanted to create something like this, they don't call it a dialog box. They call it an alert view. And so let's say that you found one of these pages. So this is an example of Objective-C stuff. Let's say this is the only one we found. So I'm just going to kind of grab a bunch of stuff from this guy. Note there are ones out there for Swift as well. We're just going to kind of pretend that we only found an iOS Objective-C app, right? So some of the things it talks about in here is kind of the old way to do alert views. And so you can see that used to, they were alert views and you set them up like this. But then starting in iOS 8, they actually made a new thing you could do, and that was called an alert controller. And so that was kind of the new way to do things. So let's say that this is the page we found and we were wanting to try to learn about dialogues. And we can see that what they do here is they create an alert controller. Okay, that's great. they use AlertController with title, message, and preferred style. So, I mean, to be honest, we could kind of start doing some of those things, right? So I'm going to say let in the hopes that this is going to be a constant. I'm going to say AlertController. I really need a good way to get their code and our code kind of side by side. I can kind of do that, but it's hard on the screen here. Maybe I'll make an image pop up in post-production or something like that. So I'll say UIAlertController, and then I'm going to use one of their constructors. I want title, message, preferred style. My title is going to be specific to this app. So I'm going to say create a movie quote. Actually, I think in my notes I said create a new movie quote. And then after that, we've got a message. To be honest, I'm just going to put the entire message into the title, and I'm just going to leave message blank. Preferred style, I'm going to use the same trick I always do. I'm going to hit enter on it, and then right arrow and a dot, and it's going to tell me my options. So it turns out that I have two options. One is alert, the other is action sheet. Action sheet is like something that comes up from the bottom, and it's usually like buttons, and then alert is like a dialog box, so I definitely want alert. And then in true Swift form, if you wanted to, you could actually delete that name there and just have it say .alert. If you wanted to do that, that's fine. Don't really care. So that's great. So I'm kind of been porting little bits at a time. The next thing that I wanted to port, if I go to that page, I can see the same things I've got here, is how do I put buttons on it? And how do I show this thing? So in ObjectiveC, you can see that here's adding buttons, and then here's showing it. I'm actually going to show it first. So it's self.presentViewController, then we say the name of the controller, and then whether it's animated. So I can do that. So kind of the last thing I want to do here is, in ObjectiveC it was self, so I don't need to do that, but it's present view controller, there it is in the bottom. Present view controller, and it's the view controller to present, so we're going to present the alert controller. Animated, yes, except for in Swift now, so I have to type true. And then completion handler is like, is there a closure that you want to call when it's done being presented? In this case, no, there is not, so I'm just going to type nil. And I actually could run it right now, and I can click on this plus button, and it says create a new movie quote. I think that's pretty neat that it gives you a way to just show something with no buttons on it. And before alert views, that was actually really hard. And like our ClueKeeper app, it was really a pain to just show like a toast message, right? In Android, they're called toast messages. And there was no good way to do that and not have buttons. And now there is, right? The downside of the new system is you do have to type a lot more to get like a basic alert view. So what you have to do is you have to actually put on these buttons. And you can see that they're called alert actions. And you're going to create one using a method called action with title, style, and a handler, right? So here they've got a cancel action and an OK action, and they've got this one is a cancel style, and then the OK one is a default style. So we can do some of those things. So we're just going to go ahead and make them lets, right? So we're going to say let, and we'll put the cancel on first. So I'll just say cancel action. It doesn't matter what you call it. And so we want a UI alert action. And then we want, looks like there's only one good constructor, so we use this guy. What do you want it to say on the button? So I want it to just say cancel, keep it nice and simple. The style, I'll use my same trick of enter, right arrow dot. My options are cancel, default, a couple others. And then the handler, I'm going to hit enter on this guy. So it's a closure, right? And we do want this. So this closure, it hands you a reference to the action, which I don't really need. I'll just say action. And then this closure is going to return nothing, so it's going to return void. I don't like the way it broke up into two lines, so I'm going to put an enter in there. And then I've got some code in here. And so my code, you know how I start these things. I'm just going to say press cancel, just to kind of make sure that that works. One thing I was surprised by is I thought that, so this is a closure, they use the trailing closure trick for us, great. I thought that I would be able to delete this line and get inferred types, but whenever I tried to do it, it warned me that wasn't allowed. So I was kind of surprised by that, but it's easy to put back. I'm sure there's some reason for it. I'm not worried about it. It's easy to put back. So that's our cancel action. And then we're also going to need a create quote action. I think in the example it just called it OK action, but I'll call it create quote action. And then over here I'm going to say create quote. You could also say OK, but I'll say create quote. And then in my log message I'll just say create quote. So now we've got these two actions, and that's all well and good. But if you go back to our Objective-C code, you can see that we also had to add them to the alert controller. So I mean, that's not hard. It's just learning all these crazy syntaxes, right? So we'll just say, hey, alert controller, add action, and add the cancel action for me. The order in which you add them does matter. There are recommendations that your default action, like your OK button, is typically on the right. So if we put it on second, it should put it over on the right. And if you run it now, you should be able to click on plus. And it crashed and burned. I typed something wrong. It looks like it says I have two cancel buttons. I probably copy pasted and messed that up. So if I come back over into here and I'm more careful, I can see that my style was set to cancel there. And sure enough, my cancel existed two places. I wanted a different type here. I think I wanted default is what I wanted on that. So try to run it again, and hopefully I'll get two buttons. Cancel, which should say press cancel, and then create, which should say press create quote. Cool. I'm making great progress. The only thing I'm missing is I want some text fields to actually do some editing on. Before alert controllers, like you had to hope that you needed exactly one or exactly two because those were the only things you could do. Now they've made it to where there's a lot more flexibility, which is great. But with a lot more flexibility comes a lot more code you have to type. In kind of continuing our practicing from Objective-C, if you keep looking on that website, so here's the two buttons. They'll actually show you some snippets in Objective-C of how do you add text views. So let's just look at what they did. So they called on the alert controller, add text field with configuration handler. So a configuration handler is like setting up the text field. So we're going to want to do that as well. And then you'll notice that you don't need to add it later because you're actually just like adding it on as you create the thing. And then it's got things like putting in a placeholder. This NS localized string, you don't need to worry about this. This is how you do, like, if you're going to support multiple languages. I'm not worried about that at this point. So that's how you make them. And then you also kind of need to know how to reference them later. And so like inside like your OK action or something like that, if you want to get to them later, you say alert controller dot text fields. And then here they said dot first object or dot last object. I don't care how you do that. You can see that text fields is an array. And you get them out, right? So let's go over and let's add them. So from Objective-C, I've learned that there should be a method on the alert controller called add text field. And sure enough, there it is, add text field with configuration handler. I don't want to type all of the configuration handlers, so I'm just going to hit enter. And you can see that it auto-populates some things for me. It gives me a reference to the text field. I actually do need it this time. So I'm going to type in text field and I'm going to use it. And then it's an opportunity to do any configuration on it that you would like. The only configuration that I would like to do is I would like to put in a placeholder. So I'm going to say quote as a placeholder here. Placeholders are cool. They kind of show up in a faded gray. And then I'm going to copy it. And for the second one, I'm going to say movie title. I could have just said movie, but I feel like movie title is a little more clear for my users so they know what I'm after. Great, so I've got those two things all set. You'll notice that, again, we had to have this thing, and the parameter passed in we actually did want to use. Oh, I should mention up here, if you don't want the parameter that's passed in, you could also put an underscore there if you wanted. That's optional. Underscore means I don't need this thing, right? So I'm required to have this line here, but I don't need it. So you could put in underscore there. You can use that in for loops as well. I don't care whether you say action or underscore. It doesn't matter to me. They both work just fine. If I run it right now, hopefully it should show up, and it should show those two things. And you can even see my cute little placeholder for quote and movie title. I've got a good-looking box going on here. Only thing I need to do now is when I hit create quote, I actually want to use those two text views. So inside my create, you know what, I'm actually going to move these two text views up above the buttons, just because I kind of like for things that, I like the code to be in the order which they appear visually. So my last thing here of press create quote, I'm going to do a whole bunch of stuff, right? The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure I've got a reference to the quote text field and also the movie text field. And the way you can do that is you can actually pull them out of the alert controller. So it's got a thing called text fields, which you can see is an optional array. And so in this optional array, I know that it exists in this case, so I'm just going to say force unwrap it. You don't have to force unwrap it. You could also use optional chaining, I think. And you could say dot first object. That would be fine. But I'm just going to, it's an array, right? Why make it harder than it needs to be? I'm just going to say index 1 and then index 0 and index 1. So those are my two text fields. Just to like make sure I've got them and everything's good, you know, I could print them out. So I could just say quote equals, and I would just say quote text field dot text. And then I would say movie equals, and I would say movie text field. Oh, my auto completion turned off on me there. It's because it didn't necessarily know that there was a dot text property. And that actually makes sense to me, and that's because we pulled something from an any object array, so it doesn't know that's a text field. So I actually need to say as text field, because I know they're text fields, you know they're text fields. But for some reason, this array, you know, when we look at it, it's an array of any objects. I don't understand why they do that. I really don't. I mean, it's called text fields. Why not give me a text field? But it gives you an any object, so you have to cast it. Not sure why, but I was a little surprised by that. So you know, you can say quote and then my movie title. If you just wanted to do a quick test. And I just want to see that they print. Quote, my movie title. Things are working. So things are going good. Whew, this is a long one. Next thing we want to do is we want to actually create this quote and add it to the array. So that's not hard. So if we wanted to, we could do that all in one step, or we could do it in two steps, right? So we could say movie quote is equal to movie quote, and then quote equals quote text field dot text, and the movie is equal to the movie text field dot text. So that's how we create one of these things, and then we could stick it onto the array. It does want you to say self dot when you refer to the array, and that's because you're inside of a closure. So we'll say self dot movie quotes append movie quote. Great, and so at that point, it will add it to the array, which is great. If you run it, you might be surprised to what happens. So I'll just say, you know, my quote, not being very original here, my movie, and I hit create quote, and presto, it appended it to the list. I can't see it, right? Why can I not see it? And that's because you can only see, you know, what you have in your view when you load the table, right? So if you change the underlying data source, that's great, but you have to reload the table if you want to see those changes. So what I'm going to do is, I don't need that log anymore, is I just need to say table view reload data. It's also, since I'm inside of a closure, it's going to want me to say self dot table view, which is fine. So I run it again now. With my high hopes of actually getting things to happen, I'm going to use a real quote. I'll say earmuffs, which was from old school, if you happen to remember that one. I say create quotes, and sure enough, it adds it right onto the bottom. I didn't want it on the bottom. I wanted it on the top. It came on the bottom because I said append. So I shouldn't have said append. I should have said insert. And so I'll insert the movie quotes at index 0, right? So if I want it to be at the top, so I kind of like newest on top. It's kind of the attitude that I'm going with here. I just need to insert it at index 0, and that'll fix my problem right up. So I'm going to say earmuffs again. It's kind of nice having those two sample quotes at the start. That's really nice. Old school, create quote, puts it on the top, which is great. You notice that it did kind of like pop in. So I don't know if the video picked up on that, but if you kind of watch it again, it doesn't like animate in; it just kind of like boom, appears. And that's because reload data doesn't do any fancy animations. I like fancy animations, and so if we wanted to do that, I'll just kind of go to the slides here. The way you do it is you say table view, insert rows at index paths. You pass an array of index paths that you're going to insert. And so you were going to insert one at the top, so row 0, section 0. And then with animation, you could choose fade or some slide. I'm just going to say dot automatic. So I need to do this in kind of 2 steps. So the first is I have to say new index path. And I have to actually create an NS index path. And the constructor that I want is for row 0, section 0, and then I can say self.tableview insert rows at index path. So my index path is just an array of, it's an array of 1, right? Index path with animation, and you can see that there's a bunch of animations. There's automatic, there's fade, there's left, there's right, there's middle, there's top. Fade is the one that they almost always use. So to be honest, automatic is going to do the same thing as fade, I believe. So if you run it again, you type, your favorite short quote, earmuffs. I'm going to say old school. This time, if you watch it close, it should kind of like animate in. So it kind of does a little animation as it comes in. I personally think animations add a lot to apps, and kind of knowing how to use them from the get-go is important, because these are the things that people like. They get an opinion about your app, and it just feels cool, right? And so it's surprisingly important to do little things like animations correct. So I put some work into figuring out how to make sure to do that right. It wasn't hard because it told you in the template. But there is our creation of a quote. Great. So that's actually the end of this video. We've got our ability to read. We've got our ability to create. We're doing a lot of good things. See you next time.